Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of the Seekers Forum. Today, we're going to be talking about the stream of power that runs through all of us, that runs through all of creation, and how we can tap into our own creative source. Now, this life-giving power is the source of our being. And learning to connect to this precious resource in the course of our everyday life is the highest priority on the spiritual path. At a time when many of us are suffering from burnout, feeling pulled in too many directions at once, unable to focus our energies in ways that nourish us and enliven us instead of leaving us frazzled. The ability to tap into this power is more critical than ever if we hope to have expansive and imaginative lives. Now, creativity in the sense that we're using it here isn't about creating beautiful objects or works of art. Creativity refers to the ability to respond with freshness, with imagination, and with vigor to the changing moments of our lives. A creative existence is one that places more value on freedom, risk, and experimentation than on the status quo or caution. It's a life that's dominated by spiritual values of mystery and awakening and self-transcendence, where an individual aims to align herself with the power greater than her own mind, however brilliant that mind might be. Remember what Emerson tells us, that there is in every mind a power greater than that mind. There is in every mind a power greater than that mind. But until we learn to step aside for this power and become channels for this universal current, we miss out on a lot of growth as well as opportunities to awaken. Now, most of you are well aware of this from personal experience. Now, who among us hasn't been confronted with a life situation that couldn't be resolved using reason, logic, or personal will? Who hasn't been faced by circumstances that stymied the mind and left you at a loss about how to move forward? In moments like these, we tend to struggle and fight. We tend to force the issue, dig in our heels, and tell ourselves that if we can just think hard enough and soldier forward, we can somehow wrestle the obstacle to the ground and thrash our way through to a worthy solution. But of course, this is one of the primary causes of burnout, fighting reality and looking at life as one gigantic problem to solve or master into submission. The thing is that life will not be wrestled into submission. It's ridiculous to think that we're masters of a power that we scarcely comprehend. We've learned that it's impossible to try dominating this power without dire consequences, both to ourselves and to the planet. The truth is that each human being is a biosphere unto itself, with systems of sustenance and self-renewal that operate by their own laws and needs. Each system, in other words, each individual, has a voice that we must listen to without attempting to change its message if we hope to achieve balance and health and integrity. Each system has a voice, in other words. But unfortunately, rather than listening to the voices of our own deep ecology and responding with sensitivity and self-awareness, we tend to allow the mind to twist the truth of what these systems are trying to tell us into terms that suit our over-controlling egos. Let's say that your own deep wisdom is telling you that you need peace and quiet. You need time alone. You need time to reflect, mull over, digest what's going on in your life. But your ego mind is scared of loneliness. With each pang of desire for self-healing, your insecure thoughts assert themselves and refuse to acknowledge the truth. You may convince yourself that the desire for solitude is really self-sabotage, and that your fear of loneliness is the voice of wisdom warning you away from isolation. And that's how we twist the words of the spirit through the mouth of fear. When you do this for long enough, it's easy to find yourself leading somebody else's life. and feeling farther from yourself than ever, more disconnected than ever from your own creative source. Now, I work a lot with people in creative conflict. And this twist, I'm going to interrupt myself. Jay, can you mute the callers because it's interrupting me? And folks, if you don't mind muting yourselves before I continue so that we can all hear each other. Now, I work a lot with people in creative conflict, and this twisting that I'm talking about is the rule, not the exception. Nearly everybody I've met who's having a creative struggle has abandoned herself or himself in some way or other. They've stopped listening to their own deep wisdom and been duped by a kind of internal voiceover that turns the volume up on fear and all those stories about why you should just give up on your dreams and be sensible, and dials down the notes of inspiration, hope, and mystery. Without realizing it, a person with a creative block often has become a stranger to themselves and has a sense that they're wandering in the desert of their own life, feeling silenced, alone, and invisible, except for the shadow that follows them and accuses them of being a fraud. There's only one solution that I know of to this dilemma, and that's to discover the locus of desire. Discover the locus of your own desire. Find your fuel tank. Find the opening where energy flows into your particular vehicle, and then fill that tank up by whatever means are necessary. Desire is inseparable from our creative source. When we find our desire, we find ourselves. I'm talking about desire in its most primal sense, not the flitting desires for an ice cream cone or another cocktail. I'm talking about desire as longing, as generativity, as animation, as participation, the kind of desire that roots and flowers and seeds our existence. When we lose touch with that primal yearning, which is identical to the yearning that draws a plant toward the sun, we lose our aliveness and begin to wither. Talking about desire in this way can sound counterintuitive, contrary to what people imagine spirituality to be about. Some kind of a cessation of desire, freedom from want, a sort of floaty non-attachment to the things of the world. But this desireless state, quote unquote, is really just a caricature of awakened life. As any spiritual teacher will tell you, without desire, you would cease to care about waking up in your life. You would stop paying attention. You wouldn't care about becoming mindful. A teacher would remind you that awakening can happen in one of two ways: through what Christian mystics call the via positiva, meaning some experience of epiphany or joy, or by the via negativa, meaning through some form of loss or pain. For most seekers, our greatest spiritual lessons emerge through hardship, in fact. Because hardship, loss, pain, threats to our self-image are what tend to crack the ego apart. Spiritual desire often comes from a wanting not to be in pain anymore, not to feel lost or empty of faith. And that's why most spiritual traditions encourage us to feed our spiritual desire and not suppress it. Because acknowledging the pain of our imagined separation liberates the desire not to feel separate. Acknowledging the pain of our imagined separation, feeling it, liberates the desire not to feel separate. And that brings us back to the stream of power and how it feeds creative life. Until we become aware of our own limitations, including our fears, our resistance, our delusions, our pride, and so on, and how they block this greening energy from flowing freely, we may lack the conviction that's necessary to change our behavior, improve our choices, and transcend our own limitations. The question is, how can we stop this self-blocking impulse? How can we learn to ride the river? How can we adjust to the degree of aliveness that's coursing through us at any moment? An aliveness that many of us claim to want and yet actually fear at the same time. How can we stop the pain of feeling unenergized, lackluster, cut off from our source, as well as the power of our own creative imagination? I put together a short list of practices that have helped me over the years, some of which I've already mentioned, and I will give them to you now. The first is investigate how fear and desire interact in your personal life. Those of you who studied with me know, have worked on this issue of fear and desire, that interface, and understand that that is your growing edge. That is the edge of our creativity. Shutting down the energy of desire compromises our connection to aliveness, as I've already said. And fear is our most common mechanism for quashing this energy of desire. What this does is creates internal stress, like pushing the accelerator and the brake in your car at the same time. And that leaves us grinding our wheels. It causes friction that becomes physically and psychologically damaging. Once you've identified where conflict exists in you, look at the fear stories that are holding you back. Also at the shame, guilt, risk aversion, as well as social conformity that intensify this fear and keep you stuck. Ask yourself, who would you be without these fears? And why do you resist these particular desires? These are great questions to ask in the process of liberating our own creative energy. The second practice is to pay attention to where you are overly controlling, where you over worry and over predict negative outcomes. Nothing saps the spirit like catastrophizing. When you indulge the tendency to expect the worst, you gag the muse and you deprive yourself of the chance to become resilient. That's because controlling outcomes is antithetical to the creative impulse. Controlling outcomes is antithetical to the creative impulse. Creativity means moving toward the unknown. It means approaching life with beginner's mind. Control, on the other hand, encourages us to just repeat what we know and protect ourselves from surprises, since God knows what terrible things they might bring. The third practice is, as I was just saying, pay attention to the flame of discontent and the pain of perceived separation. When we avoid the truth of our own longing, we undercut its motivational power and the desire to bring it to an end. We also compromise the longing for connection and transcendence by denying it and keep ourselves in a holding pattern, neither here nor there, feeling discontented and disempowered, but willfully unclear about the cause of these discontents. It's much better to acknowledge spiritual longing and let the flame of discontent motivate you to practice and search for answers. So ask yourself, do you pay attention or sufficient attention to your own spiritual longing? Are you aware of the pain of separation and alienation and the surging desire to ride the river? If you're not aware of these things, ask yourself why you're not aware of these things. Great line of inquiry. The fourth practice is to be cognizant of when you misinterpret the voice of your soul, your own deep wisdom, to fit into the fears of the mind. Rationalizing emotional and spiritual truth to fit the parameters of logic, rationale, common sense, protecting the status quo, is a surefire way to lose touch with yourself and the liberating energy of spiritual truth. So notice when and how you mistranslate messages arising from your own core. How do you compromise and undercut information that's trying to guide you from bondage to wholeness? How do you water down intuition and dilute this clear voice that's arising from what you profoundly know to be true? These are great questions to ask. The fifth practice is to give equal weight to physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual health. This is a big one. Because to access the universal stream of power that we're talking about, it's critical to pay attention to the needs of the body as well as the mind, and to remove obstacles to health and well-being. You can have a thriving emotional, intellectual life, as well as a regular spiritual practice, for example, but both of these will be diminished if you ignore the needs of your body. You can have an amazing self-care regimen and a thriving spiritual practice, but that will do little to balance emotions or increase your social intelligence. So notice where you lay your emphasis and begin to create pathways to integration. Number 6, find your fuel tank. Locate what gives you joy, what makes you curious, what inspires you, as well as what troubles you. Because what troubles you is also a pointer to what needs healing and where a desire is leading you. And that means being honest about what matters to you today and what may have outlasted its value. It means questioning your story of meaning, which is always evolving, and being honest with yourself about your shifting needs and values. When you are honest with yourself about what matters to you today and what doesn't, you also need to be willing to let things go that are obsolete. So ask yourself, what do you pretend to care about that doesn't really matter to you much anymore? Okay? And what uplifts and animates you that is new or counterintuitive in your life? If you resist being honest about these questions, ask yourself why the resistance? What do you not want to look at? What do you fear changing or choosing differently? The 7th practice is to pay attention to your taboos and your shadows. As I've talked about so many times in the Seekers Forum, we often conceal our most powerful, original, and creative parts in our psychological shadow. We fear their transformative powers and how our lives might be energized by letting our secrets out of the bag. That's because, as most of you know, we fear our own greatness, our own brightness, our own scale, our own bigness, at least as much, if not more, than we fear our weakness and insecurity. We tend to suppress our gifts behind walls of conformity and propriety and seemliness, not wanting to stand out too much or take up too much space. So ask yourself where you are playing it small, and look at the taboos and shadows that tend to hold you back and block the ability to be as creative and imaginative and alive as you might otherwise be. Because what we call modesty is often a mask for shame, in the same way that caution can be a smokescreen for cowardice. So how do you hide your own light under a bushel? How do you play small? What taboos have you set up to prevent you from becoming too free? Where are your shame and guilt triggers, and what are the stories that surround them? Great stuff to investigate. Number 8, surround yourself with creative people, opportunities, and situations. The people in our lives are either our biological allies or our biological foes, because energy is contagious, and we catch each other's emotions like a cold. And that's why it matters so much to identify the individuals in our lives who are open channels and those who conspire against our freedom and our growth. It can be hard to recognize and admit that certain people in our lives may be more adversarial than supportive, either deliberately or just due to their own limitations. It can be equally hard and painful to admit that situations that we enjoy may be counterproductive. They may block or oppose our best interests. They may prevent us from bringing our own full self into the world. If our highest value is to be free, to be authentic, without interference, we need to be willing to weed out the wholesome from the unhealthy. Number 9, focus on where your aptitudes and desires dovetail with what the world needs. This is extremely important. If you see yourself, body, mind, and spirit, as being in conversation with reality, what are you drawn to talk about that speaks to the listening of others? Where do your gifts fit with what or who needs healing? How can who you are contribute to the betterment of life on this planet in whatever small or invisible way? By locating and focusing on that point of connection, that point of conversational reality, as David White calls it, its power and its influence will increase. And when that happens, your own personal fortune, in the sense of feeling useful, the feeling that you belong, will rise, as well as that of the people around you. And finally, the 10th practice is to remember that life is exceedingly short. Okay? Remembering impermanence brings a kind of awe. And it also connects you to the urgency of not wasting the present. The present, after all, is nothing but that stream of power that we're talking about. To enter the present is to enter a vast, peaceful torrent of life that's unfolding beyond our control. A life that sustains, informs us, and also invites us to become good riders, to become skillful cooperators with the power of God. Remembering that this opportunity is fleeting and open-armed will encourage you not to waste time. It reminds you that all you need to do is show up, quiet your mind, touch the earth, and feel the energy that's pulsating through every moving, breathing moment. Presence is the key to everything. So that's what I wanted to say to you today about the stream of power. And now, Jay, we can open up the lines and I will turn on my video, and it'd be great to have some conversation. Maybe I should ask a question.
That's a good idea, Mark.
I'm curious to know where you shut down where and why you tend to shut down your own creativity, and which of the practices that I mentioned could help you in removing the obstacles to your own blossoming, to your own potential.